Okay, so today we're going to be drawing these glassy cherries using graphite pencils and these tools. I'll put a list of all the tools I've used in the description, and this is a basics video where you will learn some of the tips and tricks that I use to draw these. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just go over this. I traced this earlier using some tracing paper, just so that I can get a rough idea of the proportions and where things are. So I'm using here a mechanical 2B pencil. This is my go-to pencil that I love to use. I find it really versatile. But you can use any pencil, of course, and this is something you want to do just to get the proportions right. Don't press too hard, just do some light lines. And then I'm going to come in, I'm using a 3B or 4B pencil here, and I'm just going to use it on its side just to put some material down, some graphite down. Okay, I'm just putting this down so I can bring some texture and something to work with. Obviously, when you're drawing with pencil, most of the time what you're doing is you're moving graphite about and erasing it. So I'm going to come in now with my blending stump, and I'm just going to blend in this graphite. This is the first layer. Just blending the cherries. You can start to see the cherries develop at each layer that you do. If you do it in layers, it means you can correct mistakes a little bit more easily. And I'm using the blending stump to just blend in all the areas that I shaded. Okay, so now we've done that. What we're going to do next is we're going to go over it again. This is with a 6B pencil, so it's a little bit darker, but this time I'm going to leave the areas that I want to remain light, where the light catches the cherry. This brings in some of the structure of the cherry. Just being careful not to go over the edges. Pressing a little bit harder where it's darker, but not worrying too much at this stage. Now I go into this in a greater depth over on my Patreon channel. If you sign up to my Patreon, I really appreciate it. It helps me make more of these videos. And I go into full in-depth into all of this. It's done in real time so that you can draw along with me. And obviously I also answer any questions that you have. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. I do try to reply to every comment. Now I'm going over here again with the blending stump, so each layer that I add in of graphite I'm going to blend in, and as you can see each layer gets deeper and deeper and darker. So I'm going to use a couple of different erasers here. I'm going to use a mechanical eraser, a putty eraser and a normal pencil eraser. They all do different things. I like the putty eraser because it can lift graphite. This pencil eraser has a softer nib, so you can do a little bit more of a smoother blend, and the mechanical eraser, the white one, is a little bit harder and you can get more defined edges. So I'm using a mixture of these erasers to lift these highlights on these cherries. Trying to leave some shadows where the stems go over the cherries also. Now I'm coming in with my mechanical eraser. You can use obviously this or a 2B pencil or a 4B pencil. If you're using a normal pencil, something a little bit darker would be better. Something like a 4 or even a 6B. I'm able to use darker and lighter shading for these areas depending on how dark or light they need to be. And I'm just starting to bring in a little bit more detail and a little bit heavier on the darker areas. And these will be blended in yet again. You want to try and remove all the obvious pencil lines when blending. So I'm just going over, layering these in, darkening each area as I can. If you do it in layers, then it means that if you do make an error, you can correct it a little bit more easily. not pressing quite so hard on some of the areas and trying to remember which direction the light is coming from. And starting to bring in a few more details now. And again, this is a speeded up, quicker version of my Patreon videos where I go into greater depth and it is in real time, so you can draw along with me. So take a look. If you do support me over on Patreon, it does help me produce more videos. And I have other tutorials on there as well, so if you want to learn to draw in using pastels or coloured pencils, they're also there too. You can move on to coloured pencils once you've got the basics with graphite pencils. It's a good way to start with graphite pencils. I'm just blending in, so these areas here I'm blending in, and I'm just using the blending stump as a tool to almost draw with, just to smooth in these highlighted bits, to try and make the edges and the transition to the highlighted bits a little bit more smooth and feathered. And I'm using the putty eraser again just to re-highlight those areas that are needed. Starting with pencils and drawing things like fruit is always a really good way to learn. You learn how to do textures and highlights. So it's a great way to learn how to draw, even if you want to move on to pastels or coloured pencils or any other form of art. It all helps. You very often find that some of the techniques used blend in or lend themselves well to other mediums, although, having said that, other mediums can be different. Using dark colours as well in pencil drawings or any other drawing is always something that I think brings a greater depth to a drawing. A lot of people are too afraid to go too dark, whereas it does bring that depth into a drawing and can make it a lot more realistic. Again, something else I go into in more detail over on my Patreon. Okay, so I'm just going around now, bringing in this final layers, just bringing in these darker areas, and obviously then I'll be coming in and reblending these lines. And make sure that the lines are clean around the edges. Just finishing off now with some of the darker areas. Pressing a little bit harder with the pencil. Making sure the lines are clean where they need to be. I'm making this one behind a little bit darker. The light is coming from the top right, looking at this picture, but because a cherry has different little bumps and lumps, smooth bumps and lumps on it, it will have these different angles of light bouncing off the skin of the cherry. And I'm bringing in some of the details as well, some of the water droplets also. And now bringing in some texture into the leaf, so I'll be putting this graphite down and then I'll be blending it in. And I'm going to use this mono eraser, keeping it a sharp line just to put in some of the leaf veins. They go in across and down, and then shading in next to some of the veins and between them will bring in the texture to the leaf. Using some greaseproof paper as well, just to keep my hand from smudging the picture. Now I'm bringing in some darker areas onto the stems, just to make the stems look a little bit more real, trying to keep the darkest areas in the middle. Bringing in the details to the stem where it's all sort of triangular, smoothing it in, and then lighting in, using the mono zero eraser to lighten the areas. So again, almost painting with erasing. Putting in these little water droplets now, so I'm putting it in little dark areas, little dark circles. You can do it the other way around as well, sometimes that's easier. And then I'm using the mono eraser just to highlight next to those dark circles, and this gives the impression of a wet surface. Brings a touch of realism to your picture, and not forgetting to put the shadow in where the shadow hits the surface that the cherries are on. And I'm also going to use a makeup brush here just to use to smooth off some of these areas, and it kind of darkens up these areas as well. It's just a cheap makeup brush, trying not to darken the areas where I've got the water, and there we are. So if you go over to my Patreon channel, you'll have a full tutorial of this where it is in real time, and you will learn all of the tips and tricks I use, and you can draw along with me. But I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to making many more.